My daughter shouted, "We are not your servants. They left me on the floor after my stroke. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads." The light from the window hurt my eyes. My body still ached in places I couldn't name. But I was home. That word used to mean something. I sat in the corner of the kitchen, trying to steady my breath. The room felt familiar but colder, like I'd returned to a memory someone else now owned. Rachel walked in, scrolling through her phone. I waited for her to look at me, to notice I was trembling a little. I hadn't slept well, and my head still pulsed with a dull ache. I smiled and asked softly if she could bring me a glass of water. She didn't look up. Then she snapped, "We're not your maids, Mom." The words didn't land right away. They echoed strangely, as if someone else had said them, not the daughter I used to cradle through the night. My heart dropped. A strange pressure built behind my eyes, like heat and shame mixing in one place. My mouth opened to say something, maybe even to apologize for what I didn't know. I reached for the counter to steady myself, but my fingers felt loose, disconnected. The room began to tilt, edges blurring like an old photograph. My knees gave out. I felt the cold tile first through my skin, then in my bones. My chest was tight. My vision narrowed. I thought I heard Lucas behind me laughing from the living room. A short, sharp laugh. Then the sound of a bag of chips crackling. That was the last thing I remember. Not the pain. Not the fear. Just that laugh, and the way Rachel turned her back. 2 years ago, life still made sense. George would kiss me on the forehead every morning, humming as he poured his coffee. Rachel groaned, but still my little girl would stop by with a bag of cinnamon rolls, sit on the porch, and rest her head on my shoulder, like when she was 10. There was laughter then. There was warmth in the kitchen. We didn't say "I love you" every day, but it was there in the way George would turn down my side of the bed when I had a long day. Or how Rachel always cut the crusts off my sandwiches, even when I never asked. Then one day, everything stopped. George left for work like any other morning. Coffee in hand. Soft laugh. A quick kiss. Hours later, 2 officers showed up at the door. Uniforms stiff. Faces pale. There had been an accident on the freeway. A truck. Rain. Skid marks. And just like that, I was a widow. Grief doesn't hit like thunder. It seeps in. It sticks to the walls. I remember sitting in the kitchen staring at his untouched coffee mug. The steam had long disappeared, but I couldn't bring myself to wash it. That was when I pulled out the insurance papers. $350, zero. A number that made me sick. A number that meant George would never walk through that door again. Rachel was a wreck. She and George were closer than I'd ever really admitted. Lucas tried, but sadness made him uncomfortable. He'd pat my shoulder and say things like he was a good man. But there was no real feeling in it. After the funeral, I couldn't sit still. I needed to do something that meant something. That's when I decided to use the money to buy them a home. Something George would have wanted. A future for Rachel. A clean, quiet house where love could grow. Michael, George's lawyer, suggested we write the contract carefully. I waved him off at first, but he was insistent. He added a clause. A quiet little sentence that said if I was ever mistreated, I could reclaim full ownership. I didn't think we'd ever need it. Rachel signed without reading. Lucas never even asked. That day she hugged me and said she couldn't believe how lucky they were. I smiled through tears and told her her father would be proud. I walked through the empty house imagining future grandkids playing on the carpet, George's photo above the fireplace. It almost felt like peace, but now I sit here sore and silent, a stranger in this very house. The house paid for by the man who loved me, the man whose death became a down payment. And I ask myself, what would George think if he saw all this, the silence, the coldness, the way they barely look at me. This house was never meant to be a cage. But now I wonder, was it a gift or a slow goodbye in disguise? The doctor told me to rest, to take gentle walks around the house, to avoid stress. But how do you avoid stress when your presence is treated like a problem? The first few mornings back, I stayed in my room. I didn't want to be in the way. I thought they might come check on me. They didn't. I would hear the coffee machine whirring laughter from the living room, the door closing behind them as they left for errands. But no knock, not even a whisper of concern. At breakfast, they spoke to each other, but never to me. They poured 2 mugs of coffee. None for me. I watched from the edge of the kitchen, as if I were a visitor in my own life. I tried to smile once, hoping to be invited into the conversation. Rachel glanced at her phone. Lucas left the room. That was my answer. I offered to fold the laundry. Rachel said she already did it. Lucas said I should just rest. But it didn't sound like care. It sounded like a dismissal. A polite way to say I wasn't useful anymore. Every day I became quieter. My footsteps softer. I closed doors carefully. I whispered my thank yous. I felt like I was apologizing just for existing. When I opened the fridge, I felt guilty for wanting food. When I sat at the table, I made myself smaller. At lunch, I ate alone. The clink of forks between them filled the air, but never a word was said in my direction. They didn't ask if I needed anything. They didn't offer. I stopped asking. It was easier that way. One night, I left a note on the fridge that simply said, out of bread. Can we get some tomorrow, just that? Polite, small, easy to ignore. The next morning, the note was gone. But so was the bread. At first, I thought maybe they forgot. Then I saw the grocery bag on the counter full of chips, soda, and snacks. None for me. Not even by accident. I stood there for a moment, holding onto the counter to steady myself. Then I turned around and went back to my room. I cried quietly into my pillow, pressing it tight against my face so they wouldn't hear. I told myself maybe they didn't mean it. But the ache in my chest said otherwise. That's when I realized this wasn't neglect by chance. This was choice. One evening, I overheard Lucas whispering in the hallway. This wasn't the deal. We didn't sign up to play nurse. Rachel didn't say anything. Or maybe she did, but the silence between them said more than words ever could. That night, I noticed my favorite blanket missing from the couch. A small act. A silent punishment. A reminder that even comfort had conditions now. I moved slower. Spoke less. Smiled only when spoken to, and even then rarely. I thanked them for small things they didn't do. I clung to crumbs of civility as if they were affection. But I knew better now. This was the house I gave them. The roof I built with my husband's memory. And yet in every hallway, every mealtime, every ignored word, I was being erased. And worst of all, they didn't even notice. The fall wasn't fast. It felt like time stretched thin, like my body gave in before my mind caught up. My knees buckled first, then my hips slammed against the tile. A hard shock ran through my spine. I tried to scream, but it came out cracked and small. Rachel turned, saw me on the floor, and didn't rush. She looked annoyed. Then she walked down the hall and slammed her bedroom door shut. The sound echoed louder than it should have been. Like a final answer. I tried to move. Nothing worked. My legs were heavy, numb. My arms twitched, but I couldn't lift myself. The tile was cold and unforgiving. Every second dug deeper into my skin. I called her name again, weaker this time. Lucas stayed on the couch. The television flickered across his face. He didn't even glance at me. The volume rose. I could hear him chewing something. Chips. The crunch was sharp, cruel, uncaring. I was 20 feet away. but I had never felt more alone. I stared at the ceiling. The lights swirled. My heartbeat thudded slow and loud in my ears. I couldn't cry. Not even that worked. I lay there feeling the warmth slip from my fingers. It wasn't just a fall. It was something else. A goodbye. 20 minutes passed like a lifetime. No one came. No footsteps. No voice. Just the sound of my breathing, shallow and scared. I thought of George. I thought of how he used to pull me up after I tripped on the stairs. How he'd laugh and kiss my forehead. And now I was here, on a cold kitchen floor, forgotten in a house I gave away. I heard a knock, then another, then shouting. It was Linda. She always came by around 9 for our morning walk. I had forgotten today was Tuesday. Through the haze, I saw her face at the window. Her hands pressed against the glass. Her voice rose sharp with panic. She saw me. I couldn't speak, but my eyes must have said enough. She reached for her phone. The next sounds were sirens. Doors slamming. Heavy boots on tile. I was lifted, rolled onto a stretcher, the cold leaving my skin inch by inch. I remember one of the paramedics asking Rachel how long I had been down. She shrugged. Said I was dramatic. Said I tended to make small things big. The nurse nodded, like it was just another old lady with a flair for attention. But Linda didn't leave. She rode with me, held my hand, whispered, I'd be okay. Her fingers were warm, steady. I had known her for 5 years, but she'd never felt closer than in that moment. I realized then what kindness was supposed to feel like. When I woke up, the room was too white, too quiet. Rachel was on her phone in the corner. She didn't look up. She didn't ask how I was. Linda sat by the bed. Her eyes were red. She had been crying for me. Something in me cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. My daughter left me to die on that floor, and the woman next door saved my life. I had lost something that morning, something I didn't even know was still holding on. A thread of belief that family means love, that being a mother still mattered. But lying in that hospital bed, I finally understood. It didn't. I stared at the ceiling of the hospital room for hours. The pain was dull now. The kind that doesn't scream, but hums behind your ribs like a quiet threat. Linda had gone home. Rachel had left without a word. The nurse brought lunch. I barely touched it. But I did remember something. A voice. A detail. Years ago, after George's funeral. Michael, our family lawyer. He had come by the house sitting awkwardly in his gray suit. I had told him I wanted to use the insurance money to buy Rachel and Lucas a home. He didn't say no, but he didn't smile either. He asked one question. What happens if they ever turn on you? I laughed back then. Said Rachel would never do that. But he gently pushed the papers across the table anyway. A special clause. Transferable ownership, but with conditional rights. If I was ever mistreated, removed, or disrespected in that home, the deed would legally default back to me. I signed it not thinking I'd ever need it. Rachel had signed too. She didn't read it. Neither did Lucas. Now lying in that hospital bed, the memory came back sharp and full. I reached for the phone and called Michael. My voice was hoarse. I asked him to pull up the old contract. He promised to check and call me back within the hour. He did, and his voice was calm but firm. Eleanor, you still own that house. Rachel and Lucas are occupants. Nothing more. You're fully within your rights to revoke the transfer. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But something shifted inside me. A quiet click, like a locked door opening in my chest. I sat up straighter in bed. I asked the nurse for a pen and paper. I began writing down a plan. Not revenge. Not anger. Something deeper. Justice. Boundaries. A return to myself. They left me on the floor thinking I had nothing left. But they forgot one thing. I still own the house. I walked back into the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Rachel barely glanced up from her laptop. Lucas didn't pause his game. The silence that greeted me wasn't cold. It was nothing. That was worse. I told myself to breathe. I was no longer there to heal. I was there to observe, to listen, to confirm what I already knew but needed to see with my own eyes. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway and asked Rachel if she could help with the laundry. My voice was steady, almost gentle. Lucas laughed from the couch. He asked if I wanted a foot massage too. Rachel rolled her eyes and said I should hire a nurse. She had her own life. She said it like I had forgotten that. I nodded. No argument. No reaction. Just a simple thank you and turned away. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept old keepsakes and found the mini camera Michael once gave me for home safety. I charged it, wiped it clean, taped it inside the kitchen vent facing the table. Then I placed another by the hallway. Small, hidden, silent. Much like me. Every word, every smirk, every eye roll. I wrote them down. I began a log in a small notebook with a red ribbon. I didn't skip anything. I didn't add emotion, just facts. They were writing the ending for me, line by line. They didn't know I had stopped needing their approval, that I was no longer waiting to be loved. The shift was quiet but irreversible. I no longer reached for warmth. I reached for truth. The final test wasn't for them. It was for me. Could I witness the betrayal and not flinch? Could I see them clearly and still choose justice? I could. I did. I had given them my love once. This time, I would give them consequences. Monday morning was quiet. The kind of quiet that holds its breath. I asked Rachel and Lucas to join me at the kitchen table. They came annoyed and groggy, still in their pajamas. On the table sat a manila folder. Inside were the property documents, the contract they never read, and the official eviction notice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Rachel rolled her eyes before she even sat down. Lucas crossed his arms. They both looked at me like I had lost my mind. She smirked when she saw the envelope. Said I must be confused again. I let the silence stretch. Then I opened the folder and slid the papers toward her. I pointed to a line on the contract. It was in bold. Rachel's signature right beneath it. I asked her to read that sentence out loud. Her lips twitched. She hesitated. Then she read it. Her voice cracked halfway through. The clause was clear. If Eleanor Bennett is subjected to neglect, verbal abuse, or emotional harm, ownership shall be revoked at her discretion. That was the moment it changed. Lucas stood up, scoffing. Said it couldn't be legal. That no court would allow this. But I didn't flinch. I had copies. Witnesses. Evidence. Ends. I told them they had 72 hours. No extensions. No negotiations. This wasn't a discussion. This was the result. I had once given them a home. Now I was giving them a deadline. Lucas exploded. He shouted so loud the walls shook. He slammed his fist on the table and called me heartless. Rachel buried her face in her hands. Her body shook. It was the first time I had seen her cry in years. But I felt nothing. I stood still watching them fall apart. The same way I had once crumbled on their kitchen floor. Only this time, I wasn't the one begging for help. I was the one giving a verdict. And it was final. Lucas paced the room yelling about lawyers and lawsuits. Rachel whispered that she didn't mean to hurt me. That she was just tired. Just overwhelmed. I didn't answer. I picked up my cane, slowly stood, and looked directly at them. You left me to die. Now I'm leaving you to face yourselves. I turned and walked away. My legs didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I left the papers on the table. The contract. The eviction notice. Their signatures. And the silence that followed me down the hallway was louder than anything they had ever said. I came back into the kitchen holding a single folder. It was old, worn at the corners, soft with time. But inside, it was truth. The papers I hadn't touched in years. George's life insurance claim. The check that arrived weeks after his funeral. $350,000. Paid not in generosity, but in grief. I placed the folder gently on the table. Rachel sat stiff, her hands clenched. Lucas leaned back in the chair, arms folded, eyes narrow with disbelief. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. I let the silence do what words could not. Then I said it slowly, clearly. This house was bought with your father's death, and you turned it into a cage. Rachel's face cracked like glass under heat. Her mouth trembled. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. And in that moment, something broke loose inside me. A memory sharp and sudden. She was 7. It was a stormy afternoon. I saw her through the window running back from the school bus in the pouring rain. She slipped on the porch steps, skinned her knee. George and I both ran out panicked. I remember grabbing her, wrapping her in a big blue towel, her little arms clinging to my neck. I whispered, "You're safe now, baby. Mama's here." That memory lived in me like a flickering light in a long hallway. But the woman crying in front of me wasn't that child anymore. And I wasn't that mother anymore either. Lucas didn't move. He stared blankly at the table like the weight of the truth had finally caught up to him, but hadn't yet landed. I didn't cry. I didn't scold. I just stood there between the past and the present. Because some truths don't need to be yelled. They just need to be seen. I had tried to build them a home, not a castle, not a shrine, just a place where love could live. Instead, they turned it into a museum of silence. And I was tired of walking its halls like a ghost. I walked to the hallway folder still in hand. I paused once, glancing at the old family photo on the wall. George's smile frozen in time. I whispered to him in my mind. I did my best. Then I turned the corner and left them to sit in the mess they made. By Tuesday morning, I told them they had 44 hours left. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said it plainly while standing in the doorway, coat on, and suitcase by my side. Rachel sat on the couch, her face still swollen from crying. Lucas stood stiffly by the window, arms crossed, lips tight. I didn't wait for a response. I had said all I needed to say. I looked at them one last time and told them I hadn't forgiven them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hadn't closed the door either. I said maybe one day when you learn love again, you'll find your way back. Then I turned away. I wasn't walking away from them in anger. I was walking toward myself. Outside, Linda was waiting in her car. She stepped out, gave me a long, quiet hug. I asked if she could keep an eye on the house while I checked into the rehab center. She nodded without hesitation. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer pity. Just presence. That was enough. As we drove away, I glanced at the house in the rearview mirror. The windows reflected the morning light like nothing had happened inside. But I knew what lived between those walls. Love. Pain. Silence. Truth. I wasn't locking them out. I was just stepping back so they could see the emptiness they created. Sometimes mercy isn't a soft hand. It's a firm boundary. And I had drawn mine. The key turned easily, almost like the house had been waiting for me. I stepped in and paused just inside the door. My shoes tapped lightly against the tile. The air was still. Not empty, just still, like it had taken a breath and held it. I walked to the kitchen. Not quickly. My steps were measured, deliberate. I stopped in the same spot where I had fallen, where my body had betrayed me, and where no one came. The floor looked cleaner now. Linda must have scrubbed it. But I remembered every cold inch. I knelt slowly. My knees touched the tile, and I placed my palm against it. It wasn't cold anymore. It was warm now, kissed by the sunlight streaming through the window. I stayed like that for a few seconds, letting the warmth sink into my skin. I whispered softly, "I'm still here, and I'm not afraid anymore." I stood up steady on my feet. No tremble, no rush. I turned toward the window and opened it wide. The breeze carried in the scent of summer grass and something sweet. For the first time in months, I didn't brace myself against the air. I welcomed it. The silence in the house didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. Like I could finally breathe in every corner without apologizing. I walked through the hallway slowly. No shadows followed me this time. Just the sound of my own calm footsteps and the gentle creak of the wood under my heels. In the living room, George's photo waited for me. I picked it up. His eyes were the same, soft, warm. I touched the glass and smiled, not because I had won, but because I had made it. I whispered, "I did it, love." I'm still standing. I sat at the kitchen table, not as a burden, not as a guest, but as the woman who belonged. I wrapped my hands around a warm cup of tea Linda had left behind. She knew what I'd need even without asking. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove anything. The proof was in my breath, in the stillness, in the way the house no longer pressed down on me, but held me gently. This was my home, and I was still alive. If this story spoke to you, you're not alone. So many of us carry silent scars from those we once trusted most. But healing begins the moment we choose ourselves. If you've ever faced betrayal, I see you. Share this story if it made you feel something. Someone else might need it too.